So here we are at the final curtain. After 9 seasons, 206 episodes broadcast, and nearly 6 years as a driving force for this channel's content, Friendship Magic takes its final call at the boarding gate. Its last taste of glory, and its culminating epilogue. I've already tackled the worst that this show has offered along with many other aspects, but it seems fitting that I call time on Gen 4 by proclaiming what this show's greatest episodes were. When Friendship Magic had its foot on the gas, sung the right notes, and gave you a performance worth reveling in, you would be surprised what kind of things it could produce, because a cartoon aimed between the ages of 4 years old and 10 years old usually suffers a hell of a lot through limitations that are usually outside of its control, and as a result, they're not the most memorable things in totality. As a result, a cartoon like this lasting nearly 10 years on air with such a wide-spanning fan base is commendable, and it would not have gotten to that point without having some really great episodes to lead it in that direction. Now, you would think that after looking at all these episodes, over 200 plus of which, that this would be very difficult to ascertain. Well, in my honest opinion, the task was made rather easy when I think about it. Now, choosing what I believe are the 25 best episodes that this show ever made is much like its contrasting list, a simple task as 5 years of critique and mind-bending tedium allowed me to grade them with marks and scores thusly. However, splitting tie breaks was not as easy, but it has been done with authority to ensure this list could be made. So here, ladies and gentlemen, fillies and gentlecolts, and aimless video surfers of the world, are the episodes of My Little Pony Friendship Magic that I personally believe represents this cartoon at its greatest. And much like any list I've ever made, it is a subjective opinion, so please refrain from complaining and commenting below that episode X isn't as good as, or is in fact better than episode Y. This is a moment to celebrate this show in all of its wonder, not for squabbling amongst ourselves. We are better than that. So without further ado, let's revel in the positives and see what part 1 has in store for us. When I finally finished the arduous 5-year odyssey of critiquing, reviewing, and analysing each episode individually that this show had made earlier this year, I realised something quite stark, and it left me with a very difficult choice to make. 23 of the episodes on this list scored an A- grade of 21 or higher, leaving me with 2 spots to be filled by episodes that scored a B+, 20 out of 25. The bad news there was the fact that there was 11 of them, all highly regarded according to my criteria. At the end of the day, the episodes on this 2-part list not only had to reflect my objective opinion, but my subjective one as well, because these are the episodes that I love, the ones that I personally believe are the best that this show has ever made, and when I had to split a very significant tiebreaker, I had to throw my objectivity out of the window and let my heart rule over my head to ensure that this was as well-rounded as it could have been. As a result, this choice was made remarkably simple, because a list of episodes that I love, a list of episodes that I believe are the best, would not be complete without Sisterhood Social on it. As a twin, the younger twin as well by only 1 minute, damn you bro, seeing the arguments Sweetie Belle and Rarity had and the rebuilding of their sibling relationship struck a chord with me, obviously. Seeing the comedy and emotional drama that stemmed from it was just a bonus as far as I'm concerned. Roping in Apple Bloom and Applejack too, this war of words and passive-aggressive actions created the brewing ground for a fundamentally entertaining episode that allowed development on all sides, surprisingly bountiful visual clout, and moral stability about teamwork and understanding one's relationship with their sibling that made this stand out from the moment I laid my eyes on it. God damn, that was many years ago. While its actions and subsequent reactions may have seemed hyperbolic, it endeared Rarity's over-the-top nature and showed cracks within her stern and snooty veneer that hadn't really been explored before, all while giving Sweetie Belle her biggest platform at the time to show off her rambunctiousness and destructive cuteness. It's the best of both worlds and provides a great barometer and blueprint for the relationships between Apple Bloom and Applejack and Scootaloo and Rainbow Dash that would follow on afterwards, as this heartwarming tale of sibling bonding resonated with anyone who has had differences and reconciliations with those tied to you by blood, and while it is a little juvenile, it's still immensely entertaining still after all these years. I look back on this early MLP endeavour fondly, not just for what it represents, but echoing as a standard bearer for this show's quality in its initial seasons, because honestly, there were quite a few good episodes, but not a lot of great ones, and this stood out like a sore thumb in some places. Its hardened exterior houses a soft underbelly that is exploited for emotional effect that makes it honestly hard to forget. It may only be the first selection of the 25, but it deserves to be here for the feelings felt and the laughs had. And there's no better appetizer than that. Yo, we heard you like series finales, so we're gonna remove all the main characters and focus on some other ones to spice things up. Wait, why is that a bad thing? If anything, it made To Where and Back Again a success. The standard formula of series premieres and finales was quite stale by the time season 6 had rolled around, especially given the plethora that came before it. It usually went a little something like this. Twilight encounters a problem with the world, usually involving a major antagonist we've probably never heard of before. She saves the day with her friends by her side and maybe sings a song or two about it. You know, world building and everything. So taking some well-loved secondary characters, all of whom are reformed villains of some creed, going on a quest to rescue Equestria from certain peril when all hope seems lost? That sounds delightful, and it predictably was. The decision to bring back the changelings into the fold was a risky one, as little difference from their last encounter would have ruined this from the get-go. Gratefully, they found a way to make this substantially different, replace our regular cast with a bunch of reformed renegades, and make this a much more elaborate affair than most of its predecessors, to be frank. What we get is a funny, tense, and remarkable journey that, much like a canterlot wedding, plants its seeds very carefully in the first part before pushing it all into place for a final frontier in the second that is as rewarding as one could be. It may lack in visual clout, but makes up for it in moral, tonal, and character implications that ripple right through into the next season's premiere and further beyond from that. Shifting focus onto a collective of reformed villains, in my opinion, was a creative masterstroke, and showed that this series still had some original ideas in the tank, as it built to a scintillating conclusion over its 44 minutes that proved rip-roaringly hilarious and bone-chillingly intense all through the efforts of the core collective that were assembled here. It didn't need a musical number, a Deus Ex Machina climax, or a villain reformation to feel like a finale. It broke all the rules, yet was still able to be emblematic of the standard formula, taking it in bold new directions that honestly were rarely executed as smoothly again. And while it did hesitate in further expanding all areas of itself to the outer limits of greatness, whilst getting lost in its pacing and timeline of events, which honestly is quite confusing when you try to piece it all together, it cannot be denied that To Where and Back Again is unique compared to others of similar ilk, and it's hard to imagine this series without it. It was a bold step to take, and damn, the risk paid off. Pop culture parodying and referencing is something that this show has often revelled in, but they leave them in the background most of the time so they don't obstruct the episode at hand. On the rare occasion, however, where one becomes the centre of attention, it has to leave an impact, or it'll just be a waste of time. Through some shrewd yet simple incorporation into the story and character dynamics, sometimes you can be rewarded really well if a reference pays off. On one occasion, it was absolutely glorious. Who would have thought parodying Lady Gaga would have worked so well in this show's favour, eh?
The main attraction.
Look to follow on from a prior episode or two in detailing the downsides of fame, especially considering the target audience who are impressionable as hell regarding that kind of thing. But thanks to a slightly different take on and a strong focus on highlighting the difference between the stage persona and the person behind the showbiz veil, not only did it feel unique, especially regarding who it targeted, but it allowed a raw, comforting and stark moral and emotive tone to come through the obvious style and give it a lot of substance, all while offering up an easily despicable hate sink to run water off its back and make it flow very smoothly, as Pinky's elaborate expressions and gesticulating added the comedic flavour needed to cut the ice. And in all fairness, we also got Applejack's best overall appearance in an episode, especially when it was the best one that actually had her focused on primarily. We see the benefit of her honesty in breaking down the facade of Countess Coloratura and Sven Gallup's manipulation around the creation to make himself a lot better off, and remind Rara what being true to yourself artistically and personally means. It's a heartwarming moral, yet still provides inquisitive and fun entertainment worth sitting through as it unveils itself herself, while providing a pleasant musical punch to boot from almost all avenues. Sure, Lena Hall, who did a fantastic job as Rara by the way, could have showed some restraint in exercising her younger chops, but that's a lone failing I can muster from an episode that consistently provides a good time, and honestly I can't say much better than that.
The main attraction
could have remained comfortable as a Lady Gaga pastiche, riding its coattails to a predictable outcome. However, by wearing its heart on its sleeve, it showed the core of this cartoon's values in the most positive way that's possible, meaning that no matter how you turn to look at it, this was brilliant the entire way through. I loved it when I first saw it late in 2015, and I still do now. There was no repeated watches needed to confirm its quality, unlike some others, and that is definitely a good thing. When you watch any list that is based on one man or one woman's opinion on anything, you know there are going to be some inclusions that will raise some questions and some eyebrows. This entry, ladies and gentlemen, is mine. Sometimes I just had to appreciate when this show conveyed something to me with realism and sympathy. I've watched all the episodes, mind, but rarely did one make me relate to it and the character at the centre of it so much. Starlight may have started out as an imperious villain who we all loved because she was so goddamn evil, but when they stripped her back to show her intelligence and social anxiety at the forefront once the alignment had shifted, it grounded her in a way that would solidify her character growth for the rest of the show's run, and I can't fault such fertile groundwork being laid so effectively right when Season 6's premiere kicked off. But when they had an episode later on in the season that highlighted both of these aspects in glorious fashion, it was obvious that I wasn't going to hate it in any way. While the execution of every little thing she does is rather simple and straightforward, following a relatively uneventful story and a plain Jane narrative structure, it doesn't try to shy away from its responsibilities, exploring just how far Starlight's got to go to overcome her biggest worries and fears, even though they are quite small compared to some things that we've seen in this show, and the task that Twilight has in assisting her in getting to a level of competence in what she adjusted to like a duck to water over the preceding seasons. Sure, we rarely saw any example of this before or after the episode, but its relatability and earnest depiction of how social anxiety can make the simplest thing possible very difficult to muster was without peer, as this character study was given all the room in the world to show the errors of her ways with witty and humorous anecdotes along the way to make it not feel like it was too much of a burden. Its thematic and moral weight heightened its quality to where in its simplicity it unveiled a character who had not been given the necessary wiggle room to confront her problems head on and be rightfully punished for her actions, in a humbling moment of progression that the season had gradually unveiled to us. And honestly, that was something we rarely got concrete from this show in the past, so to do it now was a good idea. It's not afraid to confront the issue at hand whilst making a joke and keeping you entertained along the way. It's an episode that showed me just how good Starlight could be, when given the chance to showcase her weaknesses away from the shadow of others. It was her at her purest, and boy was it a delight to witness. However, I must confess, if you aren't a small anxious bean like me, this episode may come across as forgetful, unappealing, and honestly quite awkward. But for me and others, this was the type of representation masquerading as a pep talk and eye-opener that we needed in a show centered around educating others. It made its mark and gets its recognition for its efforts, no matter how unremarkable they may seem from the outset. When you hear that Hasbro's marketing department made a decision that had Lauren Faust quit her role as creative director, writer, and producer out of protest, you would expect it to reflect badly on the episode that highlighted the future toy in question. Amazingly, however, not only was it one of the highlights of its respective season, but it provided proof that a Canterlot wedding would set up all the future finales and premieres with a structure that it could adapt from. I will admit, the fact that Twilight never mentioned that she had a brother until this point, and that it was conveniently forgotten about until then, was quite concerning. Thankfully, that worry was eradicated as the slow-burning journey to Shining Armor's marriage to Princess Mi Amore Cadenza was finalized as a goddamn thrill ride. Accusations of sabotage, musical interludes, interferences, and changing perceptions of people over time. The tension was high as Twilight threw barbs at her soon-to-be sister-in-law, orchestrating tension and conflict from within, and it only proved to be right as a parasite took down a literal god and left the world at its knees as a battle erupted. Yeah, that happened! A fantastically paced and well-worked first part set the stage for an absolute juggernaut of a second that left the viewers on the edge of their seats. As the revelation was uncovered, a great villainous aria was sung, and, as I mentioned, a great battle ensued. Oh, and the marriage happened too, and it had reverberations for the rest of the series, which is also great. Faust may have not gotten her wish of Cadence being a queen and not a princess, but at least the episode was exciting and worth the investment put into it, so I can't be too critical there. And even though it is visually limited and struggles to comprehend how absent-minded some characters were, this episode carried itself like a damn fine finale and overcame those difficulties, feeling like a journey worth riding shotgun with as you go through all the thrills and spills. This is how you make an occasion out of something, and we have the whole royal wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton to thank for this even happening in the first place. So cheers guys, at least you gave me something worth liking. It may have its problems as I've noted, but I have to admit it does all it needed to do in creating something grand and making you anticipate, as well as bringing it close to, the best season of the show at that point in time. Not bad for 44 minutes of animated television. When covering Season 6's Every Little Thing She Does earlier, I noted that when this show tackles something with integrity, it usually works out in its favour. This is another one of those cases. And while this show may not have handled some topics and matters out of fear of it being too much for the young target audience, which I immediately think is bull, when it dabbled with the subject of separation and a child symbolically and literally being stuck between land and sea and who to live with, it showed that maturity could be mustered whilst also providing enlightening and entertaining in the process. There aren't many times I can say that was present in this show's run, let me tell ya. Exploring Mount Eris and its redevelopment following the movie was a nice surprise, and more than delivered on showing us this location in a new light, whilst dealing with a heavy subject matter with as much honesty and confidence as one would expect from a show as this, using a musical number to further highlight integral tensions between two friends of different ideological persuasions and the one stuck in the middle trying to act as a middleman for them, further muddying the waters and creating substantial depth before they're brought together under a unitary ideal of understanding and embracing your true desires based on what you damn want instead of what other people want. Oh, and the CMCs were chosen by the map, which was called progression of that long-forgotten plot device. And Twilight went on a fact-finding mission by experiencing hippogriff culture and being a massive nerd about it. A nice piece of humorous filler that bridges the gap nicely. Terramar's quandary is dealt with effective bluntness, and no sugarcoating is necessary, as a child's worst nightmare picking between allegorically divorced parents as well as land and sea, because get it, he's named after the Latin for land and sea, was not exploitive of point scoring or being patronised, making his tough decision and the CMC's attempt at helping feel ever more earnest and important, with the conclusion feeling like a well-earned one as it came together in a really satisfying and clean way that wasn't ever close to falling off the precipice. And amongst a season where misdirection, complications, and derisory ideas came to the forefront, this was an enlightened step in a direction I wish more of Season 8's brethren took, as a newish location and a rarely tackled theme and moral were given the respect and dignity they deserved, proving that sometimes a delicate touch can make even the most inauspicious events resonate more than you ever imagined. And that is what makes Surf and or Turf so great. Given the formulaic nature of this show, you would think that every single episode would start on the same expectational playing field. However, this is not the case due to synopsis, title, and errant screenshots that promote it, that give an expectation of what it could be before you even rested your eyes on it. As a result, some start up here and then go all the way down there, and some start here and fluctuate wildly. It's not fair, and it means that some have a disadvantage that they need to recover from. This episode was one of those, and on the rarest of occasions, it managed to go from the bottom of the barrel, really, all the way up. Now, this may only be the 19th entry on this list, but if I am singing that kind of praise already, then that should be a good indication as to what kind of quality we are dealing with here. After watching an episode and enjoying it casually, the good fervour it retains is not usually replicated when put under the critical microscope, when I'm actually looking for the problems it has. This one, however, bucked the trend by marvelling me with its intense way of conveying the worry that children face in thinking about their long-term futures. And given the importance of cutie marks, it's actually quite appropriate, as Bloom and Gloom dealt with this subject effectively without restriction, by using Apple Bloom's fears of being stuck with a cutie mark that she hates, something I honestly can't believe we never got to this point at the season 5 anyway, or going against her family values, which she's very proud of, slowly gnawing away at her, with an ingenious looping dream cycle as a narrative structure, adding a sense of uncertainty to a situation that could have been forgettable under different hands. And given that Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle have experienced this kind of thing in prior seasons with Sleepless in Ponyville and For Whom the Sweetie Belle Toils respectively, you would expect this episode would follow suit with their underperforming numbers. But thanks to the realistic resonance of Apple Bloom's situations and an underlying theme of classism shockingly echoing through, making the sympathy for her much more pronounced than her cutie mark-seeking sistren, yes, that is the female equivalent of brethren, do not ask how I found that out, it was bountiful in proclaiming just how worthwhile this was to see come to fruition. It's not afraid to use scary and horrifying imagery to further emblazon these moments into your skull and the meanings behind them, but boy is it effective and somewhat disorientating. The moral about your future not changing who you are, ringing through after sending children on the equivalent of the Wonka Tunnel of Frights, was a worthwhile warm blanket to coerce and comfort the target audience after being reminded that your friends are probably feeling the same fear as you. Yes, that's something that many children need to be reminded of so they don't feel alone in this world, and they're put through the ringer in reminding them not to be scared of what you can and can't do, but in a moral triumph using its unique story and structure to facilitate a well-managed outcome. It feels immensely satisfying to see this episode at its conclusion. And honestly, when I think about it, I've described it as best I can because this is an episode that is quite difficult for me to describe, but despite that, its overall quality is notable. I feel ashamed that I forgot about it because when I saw it again, boy did it leave an impact and make me not question its intent evermore. It had a message to proclaim and a story to tell, pushing a character to her absolute limits, and it worked brilliantly. And much like I did, it's one that you have to watch more than once to really show just how good it is, because honestly, if I hadn't rewatched it for my records, it would have not gotten this lucrative spot of countdown real estate, that's for sure. However, through its efforts, it showed that it had earned it, and that is all that matters. Early episodes and seasons of this show had a tough job, keeping us entertained whilst also providing great moral lessons for little kiddos to easily learn and understand. It hadn't reached that point yet where it could literally do anything and also tackle on some little lessons as well. It had to follow a strict guideline, and boy did it have a negative effect at times, because usually these kind of things would come at the expense of a character's development or personality traits, creating a burdensome choice between supporting or neglecting one or even both for the sake of a conflict or story at hand. Sometimes though, both sides work together brilliantly to make their mark, and nowhere was this handled better than Season 2's Hurricane Fluttershy. To call this one a roller coaster is probably an understatement in all fairness. The gradual rise and fall and rise again of our titular and eponymous heroine as she finds her confidence was a resolute success. She goes from cowering in a tree costume onto the shoulders of her peers, and went through a lot of emotional distress, personal discovery, and confidence boosting in one of the best montages this show ever did, utilising its stringent time wisely to make Fluttershy's social anxiety the most humanised aspect of her personality, treated with some seriousness, unlike Pinkie Pie's mental breakdown in Party of One. But even with all this overwhelming tension on the table, we could still laugh and have fun, as Bulk Biceps, Random yet fun references and good supporting characters stitched a funny yet direct framework to the story to allow it to flow seamlessly to where you are by the character's side and willing them on to the end whilst finding enjoyment out of their struggle all at the same time. This episode is one that gave you an example of what a Friendship is Magic greatest hits representation would look like. A moral produced and emboldened by a character's internal conflict, being pressured to reverse its polarity under the threat of a societal issue, and giving you lively visuals and music to bring it all together into one cohesive unit. Without this comprehensive character study, Shy Animal Horse's early high standing in the fandom would not have been as strong as it was. I can be assured of that. And as a result, Hurricane Fluttershy exemplified the witty visual humour that this show had become regarded for, whilst providing a heart-wrenching yet positive story about overcoming your inner demons and realising that you are not only worth something regardless of what little part you play, but you also have it in you to rise above what ails you. It's a great lesson for kids and adults lacking in self-confidence, and that is all I could have asked for from it. If you've watched any of my videos over the last 6 years, you will know that my relationship with one character in particular is fraught with controversy, because apparently disliking this character has a penalty the equivalent of death. Seriously, there's an entire video, whose the majority of the comment section is dedicated to people wanting to tell me I'm wrong. And yes, Rainbow Dash is a very polarising character, many will note and appreciate, but there are episodes in MLP's canon that redeem the negative aspect of her character. One, however, did so more than the rest. And honestly, if you have watched my videos for any length of time and were thinking that Parental Guidance wasn't going to make this list, it proves that you hadn't been paying attention at all, in fact. There was no better representation of an episode of two halves more than this one. One Scootaloo venture of hero worship, the other Rainbow Dash's worst nightmare. Parental Guidance offers up a more emotionally raw Rainbow due to Scootaloo's inadvertent meddling bringing her long-awaited parents to the forefront, and while their sublimely adoring attitude towards their only child making them the purest cinnamon rolls even when it was their daughters and their own detriment, it served a great allegory to the positives and negatives to having supportive parents and the impact it would have on someone's personal and emotional development. Something I never would have expected this show to actually touch on, making it feel more mature and existential given circumstances. And it helped prove that all that we've seen of Rainbow Dash over the past 7 seasons prior to this made sense when you brought this all to the forefront. Her abrasive personality, determination to succeed, and have loyalty to those she cares about all stemmed from her parents' jubilant and enthusiastic form of supportive mollycoddling. It opened up Scootaloo's eyes to better understand her idol, almost breaking their relationship in the process, I mind, as it found an example of what her parents weren't, which is fantastic foreshadowing of the highest bloody order, adding a layer of emotional depth to an episode that could have easily descended into saccharine farce through its over-exuberance and inflation of the occasion. Instead, it took its time to establish the good-natured intentions of Rainbow's parents, use its radiating effect as a conflict to further bring this unit together, and offer up moral writing and story stability that made up for its visual and audio shortcomings. I loved Parental Guidance from the moment it aired, as it was an episode that reminded me of the great Rainbow Dash episodes of old, using its premise to make an annoying character relatable and champion the good-natured emphasis on moral integrity that often made those episodes shine brightly. It was expected to be cringy and honestly unremarkable, but surpassed expectation to become a staunch favourite that I have championed myself many a time since, as an argument bargaining chip that has never ever lost its potency, and that is a win-win as far as I'm concerned. If I am ever talking about Rainbow Dash in the future, you should know that this episode's mentioning will never be too far behind. If you couldn't tell that Apple Bloom was one of my favourite characters solely based on the other episodes I've noted thus far, then the inclusion of On Your Marks should have been no surprise, as unlike the other CMC members, Apple Bloom had a fallout from getting her cutie mark. The realisation that in this journey, she had no other hobbies that she was immensely good at to make her stand out once her cutie mark hunting days were over. Yes, a character synonymous with her own family's line of work to the point where nothing else was really relevant suddenly feels like a social outcast. From the moment our diminutive heroines went through a montage showing their new role in progress, I wasn't expecting it to go in the direction it did, so to say it caught me by surprise is an understatement. I wasn't anticipating it to also be dealt with so deftly either, to where it left me frankly speechless. The level of maturity, insightfulness and heartbreak all in one, it was such a revelation that made me feel uplifted at what to expect from season 6, and it damn felt like a worthy progression for the character, as Apple Bloom bared her soul and led you down her troublesome path with it. As the first half of the episode dealt with this realization, the second half found the CMCs exercising their new role properly with a thorough process to execute, as Apple Bloom found a hobby in dancing. However, unlike Scootaloo's hobby of extreme sports, and much like Sweetie Belle's of singing and whatever else she did because she never really got the time to showcase herself, we rarely had it mentioned again. I mean, outside of Marks and Recreation where she's actively teaching it to other kids, which is lovely, I would have liked to have seen this happen somewhere down the line, but the humility and bouncing a depressed Apple Bloom off confident tender taps only to have that dynamic reverse and play into our heroine's hands, or hooves, was just a sublime way of maintaining interest as we reached a lovely conclusion. On top of that, the musical number Out on My Own is a lovely, endearing and heartbreaking little ditty that hits the right emotional strides, as unlike many of the CMC's episodes, this one takes itself seriously and doesn't hold back, much to its benefit, with only minimal humour coming through to not make it too jarring an experience overall. Another reason as to why it gets in a pretty decent position on this list is relatability. At the time of its release, I was not long graduated from university and I was really scared to move on from education. I was underselling my own abilities personally and on my CV. I really didn't feel confident in making that leap after being stuck in the same loop for years. It's something that made me attached to On Your Marks with much more further than honestly many would do. It hit a spot of great wonder and relief, seeing Apple Bloom struggle to find her feet, echoing my own struggles. It therefore lingered in my mind since then, and stands up as an underrated representation of the CMC's best member doing her best contemplative work whilst exercising those demons that stemmed from a new chapter being forged in her life. It's a sign of maturity that this series needed in its 6th season, and it was more than welcome. It may not be to everyone's taste, but I love this one, no matter where it eventually ended up on this list. When I first started watching this show in early 2011 at the behest of a friend, I could see it had potential, but was a bit of a way off reaching where I believed it could go. I mean, the pilot and its follow-up at least established things and showed 2 different sides of what kind of storytelling this show will give me, but most of what followed was meandering, throwaway, character trait aligning, meh, really. Okay, there was Trixie's Ghostbusters, which was an exception to that group of episodes, but honestly, there wasn't a lot that made me want to sing its praises loudly, so what I was hoping for was something grander, something bigger, something that could show me a mixture of comedy, action, adventure, and just something that I would never have expected my own interpretation of My Little Pony to give. As a result, episode 7 came round, knocked on the door, and then proceeded to hit me over the skull with a baseball bat. The initial vision that Lauren Faust had for this show was to harken back the halcyon, gender-neutral days of Gen 1, where the ponies went on adventures that were action-packed and sometimes scary to save the world, instead of relying on the feminine saccharine stereotypes that were shoved into Gen 3 that Hasbro were intent on retaining for Gen 4. Whilst other episodes of Season 1 squarely relied on the latter, such as Look Before You Sleep, for example, episodes such as Fluttershy were allowed to prosper under that vision, and offer up something that at the time was fresh as a fucking daisy. These girls were not squabbling over where to have a tea party, what to bake for said tea party, or what to goddamn wear for it. They, instead, were going up a mountain to fight a dragon. That is some exciting stuff. However, the only problem was that Fluttershy lived up to her name as a scared, dainty flower who needed immense convincing to help, and the conflicted boxing match that was this episode began, adding difficulties to what what should have been a relatively easy cast given how strong the main character roster outside of her was, and what could have been troublesome offered up entertainment and fun due to how Fluttershy's inconveniences were implemented, being written in such a way as they weren't completely obstructive and served a purpose of strengthening this core friend group alongside giving one of them a chance to overcome her fears and allow her chance to shine. You as a viewer could easily relate to their frustrations and their desire to stick together equally, all while taking comfort that despite these obstacles, the job was still being done. It didn't waste time, and that was imperative in highlighting its success. It was the episode that also gave Fluttershy a platform to show what the assertive version of her would later manifest into, and it capped off the gradually unveiling story to where all nestled between it offered up blunt visual humour and thematically relevant baggage that wasn't heavy enough to derail its core goal. At the end of the day, this episode offered us the magnitude of what that Gen 1 vision Lauren wanted would end up looking like, whilst also ensuring simple entertainment that wasn't treated as sycophantly infantile due to its intelligent implementation and execution. This could have been a disaster if handled differently, but it was averted as the writers took advantage of the situation to shore up the bonds of the core characters, solidify its style of humour and dialogue that would be echoed for many a season, all while planting visual and musical seeds that would later flourish in other episodes as they adapted from its teachings. Whilst the series premiere was the foundation for the series, it was Dragonshy that epitomizes what this show could be in coming into its own and finding its identity. While it may have to deal with the issue of retroactive continuity, making its ending feel a little suspect, to say the least, its incredible entertainment value for what it showed on its perilous journey that ensured that something as cumbersome as the socially meek disrupting a well-orchestrated mission was actually enjoyable for once, instead of being problematic. That is some shrewd planning right there that worked in massive dividends. In relation to the last entry, whilst Dragonshy was the episode that made me wake up to just how good this show could be, it was an episode that aired a fortnight later that cemented my desire to stick with it. Sometimes a grand adventure is a good thing, but sometimes a lot of fun covered in a morally and thematically appropriate cloth is a nice warm embrace worth making. And while a moral about not judging a book by its cover can feel patronising and pedestrian in the wrong hands, bridal gossip using the race of another animal to justify unwarranted suspicion and the comedic consequences of a magical plant making things all go awry would ensure that the raw underbelly could be balanced with enough humour to where neither would cross the line and corrupt one another. What we got as a result was an eye-opening and blunt episode that surprisingly, in my opinion, goes underrated amongst the fandom, despite the fact that it actually offers quite a lot up on its plate. Do you want to highlight a crippling resignation of xenophobia and racism swamping through your friendly middle ground utopia? Do that by using the tonic of an outlandish magical deformity so people won't think about the ramifications, and you can rest easy whilst using the former to shore up a story where it couldn't fail. The introduction of Sakura and her subsequent influence in some important episodes felt like a big deal, and the use of visual humour sugarcoated what could have been a controversial subject and enabled it to tell a humbling story of blindness and the self-assured fear being overcome by acceptance and understanding in a way that wasn't as patronising as it honestly could have been, given that Over the Barrel exists as an example of what not to do with that. This was a great tonic to balance the field a bit. Oh, and it also featured Evil Enchantress, the best Pinkie Pie random Season 1 song, sung by Fluttershy with Barry White-esque vocal cords. So, yeah, there's that. But to add even more positives to the table, April Bloom had a way of making herself a star through a limited but very effective cameo, which was just awesome. When you look at all of this and put it together, Bridal Gossip, despite all the potential problems it could have had, was a triumph that looked like a well-oiled machine rather than the inflammatory sideshow that it could have been, and that is remarkable. It's an episode that offers up the core foundations of this show at work with no fear and full of honesty. It goes under the radar to where I'm, again, still surprised that people in this fandom do not talk about it enough. It's funny, visually stimulating, morally tough as nails, and consistent enough to maintain itself under immense pressure. What is not to like about that? And to think Bridal gossip came from under Hasbro's oppressive thumbprint, it makes it ever more incredible. Stand to attention everyone, I have a question for you. What was arguably the most shocking thing that this show pulled out of nowhere, much like an RKO? Naysay's racist rant? Pinkie Pie's already mentioned mental breakdown? Twilight becoming an alicorn? All are acceptable answers. However, I say that Starlight running a Marxist dictatorship in a kids show of all things is right up there, because it meant that season 5 started off with a bang that gripped from beginning to end. When you decide brazenly to disregard an established formula for premieres and finales in regard to the tone, the characters, the subject matter, and even the musical numbers as a platform for something different, it is a left turn that can leave many speechless. And that is exactly what the Cutie map, or the Cutie Markless as it was once called, achieved, by setting up the influence of not only a core plot device that would have ramifications over the whole season, but the rest of the series as well, but by showing through effective world building that different ideologies do exist in Equestria in the bluntest yet most confident way possible. No one expected a show rooted in liberal and progressive ideology to utilise a socialist autocracy to highlight its inherent qualities as well as its stern detriments, and creating quite the stirring storyline to go with it. If political blogs and mainstream awards realise the gravity of such a phenomenal handbrake turn, then it certainly was worth the risk. Introducing Starlight Glimmer's warped perception of the impact of Cutie Marks and her compassionless and ruthless personality, one of the creepiest musical numbers ever put to tape by Ingram & Co., and a sense of dread and unease that was never, ever matched, even in latter episodes of equal weight, this episode played all of its card with no affront to those around it, and rarely lost sight of its intentions, to where by its end, you were on the edge of your seat satisfied at witnessing a mature leap into new directions that was totally unexpected and yet wholly worth it. It managed to carry very heavy thematic weight, all without losing the whimsical humour that allows this show to thrive, breaking the tense and fractured ice when indeed necessary. And whilst it was visually stagnant at times, limiting its overall value, I can't help but revel in the revolutionary impact that the Cutie map had. Not just on this series' internal lore, but outside of it as well. Because thanks to this episode, any perception of this show being for little girls to be mindlessly sat in front of was dispelled forever, thanks to the absolute nerve of the writers stepping willingly into an ideological war zone as a narrative structure and utilising it to complementary effect by having the exasperation of our characters to fuel their pristine qualities and start a season on a real high note, retaining the reputation these types of episodes had by being willing to enter new territory in order to make it a success rather than relying on convention for an easy victory amongst its fan base. It may be uncomfortable to sit through at times, but it was well worth all the squirming, tense musings to see its broader idea come to fruition in such a grand way. And with that, we're going to stop there. You're going to have to wait until part 2 is released to find out what my favourite episode in this show's storied run is. And hopefully, it will not take as long as this one did to get out to all of you, because thanks to the pandemic, other commitments, and just life in general, production has slowed a bit on my end, meaning this should not have taken over a month from the last one to get out. But this is just how things are. So if you are on tenterhooks and hope you can retain your enthusiasm just a little bit more, I would appreciate it. And by clicking that notification bell and the subscribe button, you will be ensured to not miss it when it is released. So those in the future who have already seen those videos and saying, "Ha! You lot had to wait," don't be an asshole, just be happy that you've been able to see them and can take pride in that. Okay? We all want to celebrate this show, not be a cantankerous sore, an indication of just how toxic a fandom can be. But I trust you all are good-natured people who won't do that. Okay? And with that, it's time for me to bid you adieu. I've been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this is the CC Network, and I'll see you all next time.